All around the world, the wisdom keepers, the culture heroes of virtually every culture, they were androgynous, amphibious, brother and sister, husband and wife, self-fertilizing genetic engineers who taught the arts of civilization, repaired the heavens after a cataclysm, and have many other traits in common, which is like right off the bat. And these are cultures that had little or no contact.
All right, let's talk about some fish gods.
Which is great, man. It's like that it's so seemingly absurd. I love it.
Wasn't Viera a fish god?
Let me start, if you would indulge me, by quoting Carl Sagan.
Okay.
First of all, I'll say that all around the world, the wisdom keepers, the culture heroes of virtually every culture, they were androgynous, amphibious, brother and sister, husband and wife, self-fertilizing genetic engineers who taught the arts of civilization, repaired the heavens after a cataclysm, and have many other traits in common, which is like right off the bat. And these are cultures that had little or no contact.
Wow.
And I'll talk about your boy Viera in a minute.
Yeah.
So let me put on my old man glasses here. And this is Carl Sagan, right?
Okay.
So Oannes is the fish dude who shows up and teaches the arts of civilization that Berosus talks about, right? He has this strange bag. You see it in the Sumerian iconography, right? He's described by Berosus in 280 BC in Babylonica. We have his, which is no longer with us, but Eusebius of Caesarea and Alexander Polyhistor wrote about the work of Berosus in their works. So that's a long-winded way of saying he talks about how when in the early times, this fish being comes out of the river and teaches the arts of civilization to the ancient Sumerian people. And he's literally got like a fish's tail and a human aspect to it too. And that's what you see in the iconography. So we're being told that Oannes is one of these beings. And in fact, the 7 Sumerian kings of the kings list that goes back 250,000 years,
right,
they all had an advisor who was a fish god, who was an androgynous, amphibious fish god. And Oannes was the first one for the first Sumerian king. And they lived these massive lifespans.
Wow.
So anyways, this is what our boy Carl Sagan, who I wish was around today.
Yeah.
He'd call it so much shit, man, if he was around today.
Oh, yeah.
Stories like the Oannes legend deserve more critical studies that have been performed heretofore. Such hypotheses are entirely reasonable and worthy of careful analysis. So, people can shit on him if they want, but I'm going off of what Sagan said about analyzing and trying to figure out the truth of fishy friends. Sumerian civilization is depicted by the descendants of the Sumerians themselves to be of non-human origin. A succession of strange creatures appears over the course of several generations. Their only apparent purpose is to instruct mankind. Each knows of the mission and accomplishment of his predecessors. That's the Apkallu, the 7 generations of fish beings.
Okay.
So the story starts in Mali, Africa with the Dogon people. Professor Robert Temple wrote The Serious Mystery in the 70s. He's one of the most brilliant academics I've ever encountered.
Robert Temple.
Professor Robert Temple. He wrote The History of China with Newman, and the guy's freaking brilliant. So he wrote about the Dogon understood, supposedly, about the binary nature of Sirius, like white dwarf, black dwarf stuff. So a lot of people got bogged down in the Christian missionaries might have hooked them up with some idea about Sirius, for instance, like that's how they knew that. So I don't want to get bogged down in the controversy. What he really highlighted was that the Nomo, the 8, are androgynous, amphibious, self-fertilizing wisdom bringers who taught the arts and civilization to the Dogon people. So self-fertilizing means you literally procreate out of yourself.
Right.
That sounds bizarre, right? Self-fertilization. So let's go over and then remember what Sagan had to say. We go over to Sumeria. Now, give me a sec to talk about Sitchin, right? Zacharias Sitchin wrote about the Anunnaki gods, they're extraterrestrials. Nibiru comes around every 3,600 years. I don't want to shit on him because he's not here to defend himself, but he created this science fiction kind of version where he had some things right. The Sumerians are the Anunnaki, as far as the documents and the cuneiform tablets are concerned, created humans. They are genetic engineers. But Nibiru was like a mistranslation of Nippur in the Library of Nineveh. So he created this compelling but not necessarily factual, or you can't fact check what he had to say. Right? So the skeptics glom onto that and like, this is all a fairy tale. It's like, no, go back to the original translators and finders like H.V. Hilprecht worked for the University of Pennsylvania in the 1800s, late 1800s. He was an Assyriologist. He unearthed the Library of Nineveh. He found tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets. And in his book, The Expeditions of the University of Pennsylvania in Babylon, him and his colleague, Hugo Radeau, who got his PhD from Columbia in the 1870s, they wrote about the androgynous nature of all Sumerian gods. They are self-fertilizing androgynous beings that beget out of themselves. So he's highlighting the fact that all the Sumerian gods are self-fertilizing androgens, which is fucking wild, right? It's like that level of specificity. Now let's go over to Egypt. And on the temple, at the Horus Temple, the Edfu texts, which we had talked about, right? I got no social life, so it's 2 a.m. and I'm reading the old French translations of the Edfu text. I'm reading Eve Raymond, right, the highly regarded Egyptologist. She writes about the Ogdoad, the 8. Now, remember the 8 of the Nomo?
Yes.
In Dogon?
Yep.
The Ogdoad and the Ennead are brother and sister, husband and wife, self-fertilizing androgens who teach the arts of civilization. They're wisdom bringers. And 3 different passages on the Edfu text talk about the self-fertilizing nature of the gods, of the androgynous gods. They beget out of themselves. They are born without the mother. It's like clear that they are self-fertilizing androgens on the temple walls of Edfu, right? So you have this theme that is carried to China. Who creates humans? Fuxi and Nuwa. And Robert Temple writes about it. He wrote The History of China with, I forget his colleague's name, Joseph Newman, I think. So anyways, Temple says that the Chinese people firmly believe that a fish-tailed, androgynous, humanish hybrid, brother and sister team, twins, created the Chinese civilization. They taught marriage. It seems like a genetic experiment. We're going to teach you animal husbandry, the arts of civilization, marriage. We're going to control the population. So in all the tombs, you have the brother and sister with the entwined tails of Fuxi and Nuwa, all of the ancient Chinese tombs. You can go to Wikipedia. They firmly believe that these androgynous, amphibious, self-fertilizing beings were their culture heroes. And then we go to Peru, for instance. Viera emerges from Lake Titicaca. He is covered in fish scales at the Bennett monolith. His wife and sister and twin, Mamacocha, is also amphibious and androgynous, and there were temples all around Lake Titicaca before that were documented before the Spanish destroyed them, of her as like half human, half fish-tailed, right? So it's this story is carried over to Peru, and he creates humans. When all these beings are genetic engineers. He creates the giants, destroys them in a flood like Yahweh in the Bible, who's androgynous, and you have the same story play out across the ocean. So I'll give a couple more. Sedna in Inuit lore in Greenland of all places is androgynous and amphibious. And you go find this freaking stuff on Wikipedia. It's not like I'm cherry picking the data. And Sedna, Isis, and Kybele, one of the oldest goddesses in Asia Minor, Artampasa, and so many others were served by cross-dressing gay and transgender priests, like showing that, that androgynous gender fluidity, if you will, this reverence for the androgyny. And the oldest temples on earth display the double-headed idol of the androgen. Jericho Ayin Ghazal. They just found one at Karahan Tepe. Ered Ziffer is an Egyptian archaeologist. In 2007, she wrote, "The first Adam, Ayin Ghazal, and the two-headed statues that were found at Ayin Ghazal in like 8000 BC. The moral of the story is she's saying that ancient people firmly believed that the first humans were androgynous and that the gods and the engineers were androgynous, and they are displayed in the iconography of the oldest cities on Earth." And then I told her, they just found a double-headed androgynous idol at Karahan Tepe.
They did?
They did.
Can you find a picture of this, Steve?
Hugh Newman, it's probably has it in his...
oh, yeah. Hugh probably talked about this when he came in.
So it's a long-winded way of saying, wow, isn't that a bunch of levels of specificity between cultures that had little or no contact, describing the culture heroes that taught them the arts of civilization in that similar way? That catches my attention. I don't have a freaking time machine. Who knows? Sagan saying, check it out. Let it idle right there. So I tell Ered Zephyr that I said, you should do a victory lap because the paper is brilliant. He's like, I would propose the idea that the first humans revered by these cultures were androgynous. Aristophanes displays the myth of the ancient androgen cultures around the world. I was going to say, Marcia Silverblatt, professor from Duke University, writes specifically that there is no doubt that Veracocha is androgynous. All these, an academic will tell you, these people believed that these were real beings who were androgynous. You could say, I don't believe it, it's a mythology, but the traits that I discussed are, an academic will tell you, yes, this is exactly what was being said there. And the iconography is remarkably similar at all these places as well. As if, this is like Hancock. I don't want to speak for him, right? But he's like, even in the show, he's talking about Oannes, he's talking about Veracocha, right? He's beating around this bush of androgynous fish gods showing up and being the wisdom bringers. It's such a strange concept. So he's like, oh, Jesus Christ, I'm so far on the limb anyways. I don't know his mind, but maybe he's like, I'll just keep it as some lost wandering beings who teach civilization. Because if I get into the fish gods, watch out. But he's the one who kind of pointed me in that direction along with Sagan, So to your point about Allegro, I've read all this stuff, and I think he was off base in some. But mermaid literally means virgin of the sea, right? Thoth, he born without a mother. The pyramid texts in Egypt, utterance 534, Neith, who is androgynous. Oh, I'm sorry, Nephthys. Her born without a vulva. Basically, it's not a real world, Housewives of Egypt diss. It's claiming that she is androgynous. She is a self-fertilizer. All these beings are described as having, they don't procreate in the same way as we do. Excuse me. So anyways, see, it's like, oh, you believe in mermaids, you're a fucking idiot. You know what I mean? That's how a skeptic would take this whole thing. But I said, my boy Sagan is saying it's worthy of further investigation. And you would look around these traditions, and I'm not a hyper-diffusionist. I don't think there was contact between all these cultures. How could they envision and come up with so similar, brother and sister, husband and wife? Let me, if you would indulge me for a second, the idea of the crippled god, right? Androgynous Zeus, androgynous Hera, throw androgynous Hephaestus, the ironworker of the gods, off Mount Olympus because he is so deformed. He is limp, right? So the doctors have looked into it, was Hephaestus, did he have arsenic poisoning? They're looking for a worldly way to describe it. So then we go over to Japan, and the two brother and sister gods throw Abisu. I mean, they cast Abisu out because he's crippled, and he's a fish god. And then you go to Egypt, and you have Ptah, and you have Osiris, who always has his legs wrapped and mummified. He cannot walk. Plutarch tells us that he gave birth in a self-fertilizing way to his next incarnation, who was Horus, whose literal name means fish god of our earth or something like that.
Right.
I know, I don't want to go up Rain Man here, but the scope of this, there are so many kind of hidden in plain sight aspects of this mystery. I think it demands further investigation. These are the gods who are the genetic engineers who created humans. Because people I'm down with UAPs. Giorgio says, like, the idea is aliens didn't build the pyramids. Who are the gods? You know, that's what he talks about. But it's like, how do I portray you in the most kind of hurtful and disrespectful manner? You're a moron. You think the alien creatures built the pyramids, blah, 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 blah. Instead of, no, who are the gods? Salim Hassan, considered the greatest Egyptian archaeologist, I should say, in history, wrote in 1949 in the Sphinx that the Egyptian people themselves firmly believe that there was a succession of great gods that ruled for tens of thousands of years, right? So Salim Hassan says that. Manetho, who we use the dynastic classification system, starting with Menes in around 3100 BC, academics use that and agree that he's got it right. But the time of the gods and the time of the followers of Horus, which is 13,900 and 11,000 years, are considered mythological. So when I go to Egypt, I hang out with my boy, Yusuf Awan.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah, Ben goes and hangs out with him when he goes over there.
He's a super solid dude. You know, you got to spread a lot of backsheesh around. You got to know people when you travel in Egypt.
His dad apparently worked with Edgar Cayce, right?
His dad was the great wisdom keeper, Hakim Awan, right? So what does he have to say? What do the ancient traditions of Egypt have to say? That there was a time of the gods that was older, that was like 10,000 years older and older, right? Not in the main, you know, so we have, this is a great racist argument thing. There are Edgar Cayce people who think the pyramids were built in 10,000 BC. Yusuf goes around and he shows.
How is that racist to say the pyramids were built in 10,000 BC?
Because somehow you're saying that the Egyptians couldn't have pulled it off themselves.
But they were Egyptians still, just older Egyptians.
Yes, I know. This is where it gets.
They were still African people.
But, you know, the Egyptians did incredible things, you know, like that we know of, like in Ptolemaic times, we know about Karnak, on and on and on. All I'm saying, or anybody who would take an alternative approach, is that the traditions state that the Sphinx, the Great Pyramid Complex, and probably the Assyrian, right near Abydos, are from an earlier time. I think Yusuf would say that too. So that goes to this, like, and they found all these voids in the Great Pyramid, right? And
yes.
Robert Schoch and Thomas Dobecki found a void under the part of the Sphinx. So it's like, I don't know if the freaking pyramid's 25, it's inconclusive in my estimation, but maybe it's 10,000 years old. Who the f knows?
Right.
Let's get in there and see. Let's do explorations, because if there's something that is datable within the Great Pyramid, it would be contemporaneous with the date, either 2500 BC or 10,000 BC. And like Robert Schoch would say, the weathering pattern on the Sphinx is showing a much earlier antiquity. But that's just one piece of information. You cannot extrapolate and say that proves that Egyptian civilization is 10,000 years old. You need artifacts, carbon dating, in context. So I'm like, you know, I'm always pitching shows at different networks, and I'm like, I dig the idea of excavating under the part of the Sphinx. I like the search for the lost Hall of Records idea. Who knows? I don't have a time machine. Don't you think people would dig that? You know what I mean? Like let's find out once and for all. And then we could like banish this realm of pseudo archaeology that it's claimed, that like there's no basis in this, because a lot of the Atlantis myth is tied into survivors showing up in Egypt, these gods, these bizarre androgynes.
Yeah.
That has a lot to do with this, the dating and the Atlantis myth. So let's see. Let's